Magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworld.eldar.com. I'm Brent, and in this video, I'll be talking about how to get the most out of the two least represented Phoenix Lords in late 10th edition Warhammer 40k. And those can only be Maugan and Asurmen. Now, I need to acknowledge that Maugan has appeared in a lot more tournament lists lately in the last few months, and Asurmen did make it into a GT podium list just a few weeks ago. Nevertheless, these two Phoenix Court members have enjoyed much less play and much less attention than their easier-to-utilize cousins. And for Asurmen, this is because he got a nerf at the beginning of the edition. He started out pretty amazing, and then his special ability went from being able to do dev wounds to infantry on a 3-up to being able to do it on a 5-up, at which point he more or less vanished. And Maugan has existed in this state of tension between the fact that he wants to lead a squad that generally wants to be as far away from the enemy as possible, but he himself, half of his damage output is melee, and his long-range weapon has a shorter range than the squad that he leads, and that just kind of put him in a weird spot. So you could not run your Reapers the way you would normally run Reapers and have Maugan lead them. And I feel it's only fair to acknowledge that when I was doing my Codex review, I pointed this out, and I said, and for that reason, I don't expect Maugan to see a ton of play. You know, maybe you could do this with him, maybe you could do that with him, but I am not the person, I am not among the people who figured out that there's a way to play with this guy. I think James Boone Kelling from Goonhammer was one of the first ones to start doing the trick I'm going to talk about in competitive play, but it turns out it works really well. And it's also a good trick for working around some of Asurmen's frailties. And the very short version goes like this. You probably run the Warhost detachment, and you definitely put them in a Falcon with the squads that they lead. There are some other tricks, but this is the meat of it. So I'm going to start by talking about Maugan and his Dark Reapers, and then I'll do the same with Asurmen. There are some differences, but in both cases, the units are relying on the damage boost from the Falcon that allows them to re-roll wound rolls, which has excellent synergy with other abilities that they have or shortcomings that these squads have. Kind of makes up for them. And then the access to a stratagem that lets them jump back into the vehicle gives them a survivability that lets them do their job at a relatively close range, which is what they need to do, and not necessarily auto die, which is what elf infantry tends to do when it just moves into position and stands out in the open and attacks something, and then, you know, generally they don't survive. So the Falcon is a workaround. So first off, let's just touch on the detachment. The Warhost detachment has two different stratagems that allow a unit to jump back into a vehicle after doing its thing before the enemy gets to shoot at it. One is Fire and Fade. It's the 1 CP stratagem that you can only use on infantry, and you can make a normal move of D6 plus 1 just after shooting. And if you finish a normal move close to a transport, you can jump back in. So you can definitely jump out of the Falcon, shoot the thing, and then move and jump back into the Falcon with Fire and Fade. Similarly, Skyborn Sanctuary is a 1 CP stratagem that can be used at the end of the fight phase. It allows an Azuryani unit that is not within engagement range of enemy models and is wholly within 6 inches of the transport to just get back in. Now, this one doesn't let you move first, but nevertheless, it's essentially the same thing for our purposes. And as such, if you're running Warhost, you can jump back into transports for 2 CP on your turn with 2 units before your opponent gets to do anything. Now, the reason I say you're probably only doing this in a Warhost detachment, while some of you might be saying, but Brent, Aspect Host, which is the more popular detachment, also has access to Skyborn Sanctuary. And I say to you, technically right, argumentative autarch person, yeah, but you're using your fire dragons, of course, to jump back in a transport. And this is really the issue. Fire dragons are definitely one of the most powerful, bestest tools available to an Eldari player. I said in my fire dragon video, I think that they are the most efficient, reliable, and potent hard target elimination at close range in the entire game. So if you are playing tournament, like serious Warhammer 40k, like competitive Warhammer 40k, you definitely are running fire dragons, and you definitely want them to jump back in a transport if you're running either Warhost or Aspect Host, which is the vast majority of Eldari lists in GTs. Now, that doesn't mean that you couldn't run some other unit that wants to jump back into transports. You can theoretically do it after they get pinged with an agile maneuver. Fade back can be used to do this after you've been shot by an enemy unit. And you might not be jumping the fire dragons back in the transport for the whole game, so maybe you could do it somewhere else on the field. You certainly could use the tactics that I'm going to talk about in a moment with another kind of detachment, either using agile maneuvers or in an aspect host, but maybe you don't always do it with your fire dragons. But the fire dragons are a serious competitor for that stratagem, and I think that if you are planning to run this combo, at least in competitive play, Warhost makes the most sense for this reason. And the reason that we like a Falcon with Maugan Ra and also the Dire Avengers, Asurmen, and not the Wave Serpent necessarily is because what really makes this effective is the fire support role. So the Falcon, in addition to being a reasonable combat tank with reasonable durability at toughness 9 with 3-up save and 12 wounds, has this fire support rule. In your shooting phase, after this model has shot, you select an enemy unit hit by one or more of those attacks. And until the end of the phase, until the end of the turn. That's important because you can also use it in the fight phase. Matters for Banshees. But in this situation, we're not running Banshees. Until the end of the turn, each time a friendly model that disembarked from this transport makes an attack against that target, you can reroll the wound roll. And being able to reroll the wound roll has especially good synergy with abilities like Devastating Wounds. And it's a fabulous workaround when you're targeting a hard target with something that hits hard, but not so hard that you're wounding it with the kind of reliability that you generally want to be wounding it. So usually what this means is weapons that have a strength somewhere between 6 and 9 or 6 and 10 hugely benefit from being able to reroll the wound roll, because now they don't have a 1 in 3 chance of wounding stuff that's like T11 or 12. It's more like 50%. And what this ends up meaning for Maugan Ra and a unit of Dark Reapers is that they become a serious threat to every single kind of unit in your opponent's army, and they have a lot of mobility to get around to threaten those units, and you have a great tool for keeping them alive to do this for multiple turns. I've already made a video on using Dark Reapers, how you would typically use Dark Reapers. In this build, you generally want to give your Reapers, either all 5 Reapers get the Reaper Launcher, or you give one of them the Eldari Missile Launcher. It doesn't really matter which one you pick. In this role, both are good. Both have an anti-hard target profile and then an anti-chaff profile. For easy math, I'm going to talk about it as though you've selected the Eldari Missile Launcher, which is usually what I do. But they either have 5 shots, ignoring cover, at hitting on 3s at strength 10, minus 2 AP, flat 3 damage. Flat 3 is fabulous into heavy infantry. Things like Terminators just evaporate. The difference between flat 2 and flat 3 for you newer players is also tremendous. It's the difference between having to get 2 hits through or 1 hit through on really durable infantry. It's literally like double the damage output. Or to put it another way, having 3 wounds kind of like halves the damage output from weapons that are efficient into heavy infantry with flat 2 damage. So the flat 3 profile is just great. So you either have 5 shots at flat 3 with pretty good AP and pretty good strength, wound stuff like Space Marines on 2s. But then it also can threaten vehicles. Some vehicles are toughness 9, in which case the strength 10 is great, but really tough stuff that's T10 or 11 or 12 can be a little bit harder to crack, and it is low volume of fire. So, you can miss with 1 or 2. Even with good dice, you can fail to wound, and this can end up being sort of underwhelming. So the ability to reroll the wound roll is kind of a big deal. And if they're targeting something like light infantry, the Reaper Launcher anti-chaff profile has 10 shots, strength 5. So it's usually going to wound most infantry on 3s, minus 2, 1, and that's pretty good too. Now, as good as these profiles are, neither one is good enough that a single squad of Reapers on its own, unless it gets really hot dice, is just going to wipe something out, pick something up, get the job done on its own. which is why when I'm not running Reapers using this trick, when I'm just running Reapers in my lists, I generally want 2 or 3 squads of them so that they can get the job done, or one really big squad and they can work in conjunction with other things. But what happens when you put Maugan Ra into the squad with Falcon is suddenly this one admittedly very expensive tool has the firepower to just get the job done on its own. Maugan Ra can nearly double the damage output of the squad into a hard target, which in combination with the shooting from the Falcon, which you've definitely triggered at least some of into the target because you need to do so to trigger the fire support rule. And generally your Falcon is going to have a pulse laser, which puts out 3 shots hitting on 3s at strength 9, minus 2 d6 damage. It probably has a bright lance. We know what those do because that's generally the weapon you want to choose. And then it'll have an underslung shuriken cannon that, of course, is also a flat 2 damage weapon, which is additional target elimination to hard targets. And there will be times, by the way, when you have them jump out of the Falcon, and if they're targeting like an infantry squad, maybe some Space Marines or something, you'll target the Space Marines with the shuriken cannon, even if it's a large unit of Space Marines, to trigger fire support. And then you might use the pulse laser and the bright lance into some enemy vehicle or monster while the Reapers and Maugan Ra are focusing on picking up this big infantry squad. That does happen. But oftentimes they're all just going to shoot the same thing. And Maugan Ra's profile is in this interesting place where he only has the one profile, and it's kind of in between the 2 Reaper launcher profiles. It has lower damage and lower strength than the Starshot hard target elimination profile of the regular Reapers, but it has 6 shots instead of 1. And then it has higher strength and more damage than the regular Reaper launcher shot, the Star Swarm anti-infantry shot, but it has 6 shots instead of 2, but it's not like doubling its output for the anti-infantry profile. So it's this in-between weapon that normally kind of struggles into things like tanks and vehicles and monsters because it's only wounding them on a 5 with strength 7, and it's doing flat 2 damage, not 3. So it's dinging them. And the dev wounds are nice, but you're not likely to turn up more than 1 generally. But when you're jumping out of the Falcon, the ability to reroll all those wound rolls, because he hits on 2s, not on 3s. The ability to reroll all those wound rolls at strength 7 means that instead of his attacks wounding a third of the time, they're wounding around 50% of the time. And you can always use the aspect warrior token for the squad after you roll your dice to change one of Maugan Ra's dice to a 6 to push through a couple of devastating wounds. And then he has the Harvester of Souls ability, which gives you a chance to splash mortal wounds on top of all of the other damage that you've done. So the Harvester of Souls works like this. After selecting targets for that unit's attack, if every attack in the same unit targets that unit, so you have to shoot whatever it is with the Reapers too, and generally you're going to want to, so it's fine. You roll a d6 for the target unit, and a d6 for every enemy unit within 3 inches of the target unit, and sometimes that really matters. And a 5+, the unit being rolled for is struck by explosive debris after resolving all of the unit's other attacks. The target takes d3 mortal wounds. So first you remove all of your normal, you inflict all of your normal damage and remove casualties, and then you do an additional like d3 splash damage mortal wounds that may also hit other units. And you can pick a unit that you've hit and make it take a battle shock test, subtracting 1 from this result, which tends to not matter all that much because your opponent's going to roll battle shock in their command phase again anyway, but it's a fun little detail. So what you end up with is from the Maugan Ra and the Reapers, you're getting 11 attacks into a hard target, rerolling the wound roll, all of which have pretty good AP, do 2 or 3 damage, ignore cover, with probably pushing through a couple of dev wounds, on top of the shooting from the Falcon, a bright lance, 3 shots with the pulse laser, and the shuriken cannon. This combo stands a pretty good chance of wiping out 5 Space Marine Terminators or blowing up an enemy tank, killing an enemy monster. And it has a 36-inch range. The Reapers themselves have a 48-inch range, but Maugan Ra and some of the weapons on the Falcon, it's 36. But that's really good. So generally what this means is that you're going to play the Falcon onto one. Start it on the board, people. The thing where we bring the Falcon in from deep strike. Oh my goodness, giving it up on turn 1 is generally not worth it. Please start it on the board. There are rare outsider scenarios where it makes sense not to do that, but don't be tempted by that tricky trick. Generally speaking, what you're going to do is you're going to play this. You're going to move this onto a flank very early in the game, and you're going to create a situation where you can target the thing that you want to target. Avoid reprisal shooting from most of your opponent's army. Shoot with your Reapers and your Falcon, really mess something up, and then be able to use one of those stratagems in Warhost to jump back in the Falcon before your opponent can retaliate. So any retaliatory shooting that is happening is hitting the Falcon. And even if your opponent does manage to destroy it, you probably do have another round with Maugan on at least some of the Reapers. But if you play well, if you're not playing into a super mobile opponent, you can probably keep the Falcon alive for at least a couple of turns and repeat this, simply with careful positioning and making sure that your opponent can't shoot it with an overwhelming amount of stuff. And anything that shoots the Falcon isn't shooting other stuff in your army, like the fire dragons that are probably in a wave serpent near the middle of the table. So there's also that to consider. Now, there's also a stratagem that can make this hit even harder, called Blitzing Firepower, which can give you sustained hits on Maugan around the entire squad of Reapers for a CP. And that's nice. And if you have the CP for it into targets where you're like, well, this is a little touch and go, it makes sense to do. But you're often not going to have the CP for it because you're planning to have 2 units jump back in transports, probably in Warhost. So that's 2 CP right there. If you are trading in secondaries or you have Eldred, maybe you do have an extra CP in your list, but that's great for stuff like throwing grenades. And you might just not. You will often not have it available, I think. But if you really have a clutch moment where you're trying to take something out that really has to die, and this is like the only unit that can get it, and it's a little touch and go, it would be a great moment for Blistering Firepower. This is also a great moment to mention this video's co-sponsor, Adept Roll. Adept Roll is a 40K Super Whiz math app that you download onto your phone. It's incredibly inexpensive, and it tells you exactly the math for everything. So if you want to know my Dark Reapers coming out of a transport with the rerolls and Maugan Raw using these profiles into a Space Marine Land Raider, the app will tell you exactly how much damage you're statistically likely to do and what all the math is around that. So if you wanted to know exactly what is the math, if I trigger sustained hits for a CP or if I don't, how much does that improve my damage output? Adept Roll could tell you. And it really does just cost like pocket change. So it's if it sounds like it's worth the price of like another contrast paint to have that in your back pocket for at least occasionally, it might be worth doing. I'll link it in the video description. Oh, I just also want to say about the Maugan Raw Reaper combo. If you're targeting infantry too, like a bunch of Tau or something, having 16 shots with the infantry that are really powerful into chaff on top of probably at least the shuriken cannon from the transport and also rerolling wound rolls. I mean, they will just pick stuff up. This can be, no opponent wants to, one of my tests for whether or not a unit is a good target elimination unit is, will my opponent look at it and think, oh God, that's a problem? And also, what am I going to do about that? This is that thing. If you were playing a mirror match into Eldari, you would not be thrilled seeing this across the table from you. This is actually especially good for mirror matches into Eldari. And in the late game, if the transport does get destroyed, instead of hanging back, you can get aggressive because Maugan Raw also has a pretty good melee profile with 5 attacks hitting on 2s, strength 6, -2, flat 2. And then the fact that he's a Phoenix Lord with the 2-up save and the 4-up invuln means that in the late game, he has decent objective play. When your opponent doesn't have a lot left, he can certainly resist things like small arms fire to hold objectives for you and be a credible melee threat in the midfield. It's a popular combo. You put them in the transport, you play them on a flank, take advantage of the long range early, get aggressive later, and then you have an objective play finisher character. And it kind of all works the same way with Asurmen. The only difference is if you put Asurmen in the Falcon, you need to play a little bit more aggressively when you decide you're going to use it, because the Avengers and Asurmen do not, in fact, have a 36-inch range. In fact, to really get it done, they want to be pretty close. And similar to the Reapers, Asurmen and Dire Avengers have enough fire output that in combination with the right stuff, they can be a threat to a lot of different types of target. That said, they are a little bit more narrowly focused on infantry elimination. And I think one of the reasons we were seeing people use the Maugan Ra Reaper combination before, but not doing this with Asurmen and Dire Avengers, was that when Knights were very popular in the meta, if you came up against a list with a bunch of Imperial Knights, the Falcon combo was a good tool with Maugan Ra, but a little bit less so with Asurmen. Although, if you have things like Warwalkers in your army or Eldrad, who is great in this build, because Warhost, remember, if you're running, probably the biggest reason to run Warhost is that you get access to 2 jump back in the vehicle abilities, right? Two stratagems you can double up on this. You're giving up additional damage output from your Aspect Warriors, which is what you get if you're running Aspect Hosts, the ability to reroll 1s, and you're getting tricky movement and survivability. But because you likely are spending 2 CP each turn to jump back in transports, if you're running Warhost, having Eldred, who just generates more CP for you, is really powerful. And his ability to point at stuff and say, wound that better, to provide +1 to wound, has crazy synergy with things like Dire Avengers, as do Warwalkers. So even though the Asurmen Dire Avenger build is a little bit more narrowly focused on infantry in its most basic version, if you are running Warhost and you've got Eldred in there and you've got a Warwalker in there, you can have them multi-class into really powerful hard target elimination also. Here's how it works. But you really don't need to. It's fine to just run these guys as super infantry killers. You're going to give the Dire Avenger Exarch an extra Shuriken catapult, so the regular shooting on this squad that's going to be jumping out of a Falcon is going to be, because the Dire Avenger version of the Shuriken catapult has 4 shots, and you've got 6 in the squad, so it's going to be 24 shots, hitting on 3s, strength 4, -1/1, not great, but if you're within 9 inches, you get sustained hits, so 24 dice, 6s score extra hits, strength 4, -1/1, really powerful into regular infantry. But then if you can point at something with Eldred and wound really hard targets on 5s and get an extra AP with a Warwalker such that it's -2 AP, suddenly that weight of dice is actually really scary. And you're rerolling the wound roll, remember, if you're coming out of the Falcon. So even before we get Asurmen into the mix, the Dire Avengers themselves, if they're rerolling the wound roll and if they're close enough for sustained hits, they're just picking up units of regular infantry, and they're certainly messing up units of heavy infantry. With the sustained hits, they should hit about 20 times with the rerolls to wound a unit of Marines about 15 times, and then the Marines will save on half of those. So they're picking up around 3 before we consider Asurmen, who will just wipe out the rest of the squad. Then we also haven't figured in the Shuriken cannon on the Falcon, which is a flat 2 damage weapon, such that with the Falcon and Asurmen, the squad of Dire Avengers can either straight up kill or put a massive dent, nearly eliminate large, like 10-man squads of Marines. Also, we'll take a quick look at Asurmen's weapons. He's got the Bloody Twins, a ranged weapon with 6 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 5, so wounding Marines on 3s, only -1 AP, but flat 2 damage. And again, I really like, if I'm running Avengers in a transport, I really do like having a Warwalker on the table for the simple reason that the ability to double the AP, also on Asurmen, really juices the damage output of this squad. Anything that a Warwalker shoots, you can get extra AP into. But then Asurmen has this ability, Hand of Azirian, once per battle, you can give Asurmen flat 3 damage instead of 2 damage, and it gets anti-infantry. It's now 5 up. He's been nerfed instead of 3 up, and the Devastating Wounds ability, which means on 5s to wound, his weapons simply bypass all armor saves and vulnerable saves and just do flat 3 damage. So Asurmen on his own is really scary, and the reroll from the Falcon takes this from being kind of neat to really excellent, because if you're getting a critical wound on a 5 up, but you're re-rolling all of your wound rolls, you should be able to push around half of these through as dev wounds. And remember, because the Blade Storm ability on the Dire Avengers also ends up applying to Asurmen because he's part of the unit, you should just be pushing through against an infantry unit 9 mortal wounds, like 3 flat, 3 damage dev wound hits. So on his own, he just kills 3 Terminators. Now, this combo does end up being a little bit meta dependent. If you're playing in a meta where there's a lot of powerful infantry, Asurmen and the Dire Avengers in a Falcon are just an incredible tool. And I think if you're running them in a list, you want a Warwalker, and ideally you want Eldred, so that they can multi-class into killing things like Imperial Knights. And it's not like you're going to be unhappy having those tools if Eldred's ability and the Warwalker ability work well in conjunction with all kinds of units. But if you're going to invest the points in Asurmen and the Dire Avengers, I think it really makes sense to have the multi-class thing in your back pocket. Asurmen comes up with one other advantage over Maugan Ra that makes this version of the build, I should have said this earlier, this version of the build also a credible threat in an aspect host, and that is that he doesn't need, Maugan Ra eats up your second CP to jump back in the Falcon. Asurmen doesn't. He has this tactical acumen ability. While this model is leading a unit, in your shooting phase, after that unit is shot, it can make a normal move up to 6 inches, and until the end of turn, that unit is not eligible to declare a charge. Well, if you finish a normal move close to a transport, you can get back in. So the more popular Dark Reaper version of this build probably has most of its play in a war host. Asurmen, in theory, can pull this off in any detachment. But I will say that war host is a good, it has good synergy. Stuff like Eldred, people who are running Eldred, Warhost is one of the places that people like him. So you could theoretically have a Falcon full of Dark Reapers and a Falcon full of Dire Avengers, each with their Phoenix Lord accompanying them, and 10 Fire Dragons and a Wave Serpent in the middle of the field, and play a mechanized, a very dangerous mechanized infantry game, in which all 3 of those units can jump back in your transports, and if you've got Eldred, you're still generating CP. Oh, it's also worth pointing out, this is kind of a big deal on the Asurmen build, one of the things that makes it not suck. You can use the Aspect Shrine token on Asurmen, so when you make your big play, the once per battle play, you roll the dice for Asurmen, and then you change one of the results to a 6. So if you're close enough for Bladestorm, his statistical average on this is going to be he gets 3 shots through on his own for dev wounds, and then a round. And then you change another dice to a 6. So you can very reliably, I think, but pretty reliably do 9, and without crazy luck, do 12 to an infantry target. And then, like Maugan Ra, who can go melee aggro in the late game, Asurmen's better weapon is his melee weapon, the Sword of Asur, which has 6 attacks, hits on 2s, strength 6, -3, AP flat 3 damage. It's like one of the best Phoenix Lord melee weapons. It's fabulous. It's way better than his shooting. So with this one, you jump them out of the Falcon, you juice their shooting with the Falcon, jump them back into the Falcon to keep them safe, but then you can jump them out and start charging stuff. Again, the strength on Asurmen's weapon is not great enough to make it a major threat to vehicles and monsters, but with the dev wounds on there and his sheer volume of attacks hitting on 2s, he potentially can put the finishing damage on something like Demon Prince. And also, Dire Avengers have the grenade strat, so in the late game, they can shoot for their chip damage, throw a grenade for an average of 3 mortal wounds, charge in. Their gun butts don't do a lot, but Asurmen's sword is pretty good, and they can help you. Like Maugan Ra, he's durable enough to help with objective control in the late game, on the flanks, probably not in the middle of the table. But these are powerful combos, and if you're looking for ways to shake up your list a little bit, to do something different that isn't going to require you to make a big competitive sacrifice, I think that both of these are good options. Aspect Warriors have really been fabulous in 10th edition, as have the Phoenix Lords. The Phoenix Lords, back in 9th edition, it was all about tanks and vehicles, and that was a little bit of a bummer for those of us who love Aspect Warriors. And now it's really about the Aspect Warriors, and they've gotten a ton of play. But Dire Avengers really haven't since the very beginning of the edition, and Reapers have, but Maugan Ra has not really. So if you own these models and you want to switch things up, I suggest giving it a try. It might take you a couple of reps, and again, they generally want to play on flanks, not in the middle of the table, but I think you might be surprised just how effective these combos can be. I certainly was, and that's what I've got. If you have your own ideas about how to use Maugan Ra or Asurmen, please leave those in the comment below. If you wish to help the algorithm, you could say hello, the algorithm. If you wish to connect more personally and discuss these things over on Discord, I will link my Discord or the Patreon, which for $3 a month will give you access to the Discord. And that's what I've got. Until next time, bye.